Well, one of our favorite things to do is to cover things that other people don't cover around the world, things that affect us here in Canada, even though they happen, for example, in the streets of Davos, Switzerland, in the case of the World Economic Forum, or this week, in the case of Belem. That's the name of a city in Brazil. Joining us now from Brazil is our intrepid reporter, our chief reporter, Sheila Gunn Reid, who will explain what is she doing halfway around the world. Sheila, it's not Davos. It's sort of slum-y compared to it. You're at the UN Global Warming Conference, aren't you?
I sure am. Belem, Brazil, it's the mouth of the Amazon. They call it the gateway to the Amazon. It's sort of where the Amazon meets the ocean. And this is where they chose to hold the United Nations Climate Change Conference this year. Now, some places of the city are very, very nice, but some places of the city are very, very I'm going to be polite, not nice. And there's a real stark contrast with how the haves and the have-nots live in this city. And that's one of the things that the United Nations, and I think by extension, the media accredited by the United Nations normally, don't want to talk about.
Yeah, and by not nice, I think what you mean is it's just poor, extremely poor.
Extremely. This is one of the most, I think the word that they use is favelized cities in the world. Favelas are, the United Nations World Economic Forum dream of you'll own nothing and be happy. And that's really how 60+% of this city lives, where it's just sort of clapboard housing with found materials on land they're squatting on, with no hookups to any sort of sanitation service and maybe electricity. 60% of the people in this city of 2.5 million live that way, and it is evident all around you.
You know, what we think about Bjorn Lomborg, a Scandinavian economist who calls himself the skeptical environmentalist. And he has been banging on his drum for probably 30 years, making the same excellent point, which is if you had $100 billion, and these days you should probably say, if you had $1 trillion to make the environment better for people, you wouldn't spend it on carbon dioxide, a colorless, odorless, non-toxic gas that I'm exhaling as I breathe and plants inhale for photosynthesis. You would work on sanitation, clean water, electric light. You would work on things, basic poverty remediation, clean air, clean soil, clean water. And the irony of having this conference in this slum, while the private jet crew come in to talk about parts per million of CO2, it couldn't be more bizarre, the contrast.
Just walking around the city, frankly, it angers me because I see the sheer amount of money spent on this conference and beautifying parts of the city to obscure what's really happening here. As we said in an email we sent out earlier today, it's a mirage. It angers me because I think, look, and I realize I'm going to sound like a bleeding heart socialist, but I'm definitely not. But the sheer amount of money spent on this conference where the world's environmentalists circumnavigate the globe to take a selfie at a conference while the people around them are really suffering with abject poverty and a government that's failing them, it angers me. 4% of the wastewater in this city is treated. Only 20% of the houses are even hooked up to sewage. The streets, when it rains here, and it rains a lot here, they run brown with turds. And nobody should have to live that way when they're spending money on environmentalist conferences.
Wow. I saw some of your video clips. I won't play all of them at full length here. For folks who want to see your work, we have a special compilation page at rebelun.com. But I just want to play a little bit about, and I don't want to emphasize it because it's gross. I want to emphasize it because it shows there are real environmental issues that go straight to health, quality of life, and those are being ignored so the jet set crew can talk about parts per billion of CO2. Here's a clip that you published over the weekend. Take a look.
Sheila Gunn Reid for Rebel News. I'm here in Belem, Brazil. I'm here covering the United Nations Climate Change Conference. You might call it COP30, that's what they say in the UN parlance, but really it's the gathering of the hypocrites, and it happens every single year. Now, right now I'm standing in one of the first revitalization projects that the city of Belem underwent. It's called Nova Doka. That's the park name. It's a long linear park and it goes along a canal. Now, the canal is one of those untreated sewage canals, but the city has done its best to disguise it by planting flowers in the untreated sewage. And just in time for the United Nations Climate Change Conference, the sewage is actually claiming the lives of the flowers. It's called Nova Doka, but I'm calling it Fart Park. We were in this park initially on the lookout for the infamous fiberglass trees that were made by a Brazilian artist and erected in place of the trees that were slashed down to create the facility for the climate change conference and the highway through the Amazon for the climate change conference. I think roughly $5 million Canadian were spent on the fiberglass trees. I have yet to find them. I will, though, before I go home. Instead, I found what they're calling an eco tree. Again, because they cut down a bunch of trees. In the place of the real trees, they've erected these rebar structures and then put fast-growing vines up the structure, again, in lieu of actual trees. And let me remind you, we are in the Amazon rainforest. Look, people who watch my work know that I am by no means an animal rights activist. I realize that animals and humans are all part of the circle of life. And of course, you know, I eat animals, but there was something very tragic and heartbreaking about seeing these little birds plucking around in the raw, untreated sewage in a park that is here to mask the environmental damage that took place for the environmentalists to have their week-long party.
You know, it's not just that it's so weird that you said they're at the mouth of the Amazon, and yet they're chopping down so many trees to put a road through. I mean, the whole global warming is we've got to protect the Amazon or whatever, even though the Amazon is the greatest consumer of carbon dioxide, needs carbon dioxide. Tell me about the road that was hacked through the Amazon just for this conference. And tell me if they tell me about some of the rules in place to stop reporters from knowing about this road.
You know, it's actually really difficult to find the road. It took us some time and we had to get creative. But the road roughly translates to Freedom Highway, but you're definitely not free to go looking for it or to report on it. It's a 13-kilometer stretch of highway through environmentally sensitive portions of the Amazon rainforest. And it was first tabled as a project in 2012. They said, you know what, we probably shouldn't be doing this. But when they were worried about the traffic congestion around having 55,000 delegates, that's just delegates. That's not the environmental activists and busybodies who fly in. I think it's probably half as many more that fly in for the conference. They're worried about the traffic congestion. So they thought, let's advance this project where they carve a highway through the rainforest. And look, before we get too deep into this, I'm pro-highway. I think highways can be built responsibly. But this is, when they're telling me that my summer road trip is the problem while okaying a highway through the rainforest, that doesn't make any sense to me. Now, we went looking for this highway. You can kind of see where it might be on a map. And we had, a year ago, other media outlets had satellite footage of it and drone footage. You cannot find that now. There's no 2 days version of drone footage of it. And there's a reason for that. We actually met a man in the city and he worked security on this highway. And he said, well, part of my job at the highway is to shoot down the drones. And so we knew that if we were able to find it, if we put the drone up, which we do have with us, we would just lose the footage anyway. But we were able to find the highway by locating something on the map that was close, and then we sort of just hiked in. And it's very hard to find. We did find it. We were able to get close enough to it. But when I was there, man alive, Ezra, that highway is the least ecologically damaging thing that I saw there, because it's just garbage everywhere, garbage floating in the tributaries, garbage floating in the rivers, people swimming in the rivers of garbage. While I can't use a straw at home,
Yeah.
and there's a highway through the rainforest right there, but we were able to get some footage of the highway and show people. And I think it's really ironic that there are so many journalists here for the United Nations Climate Change Conference, and not a single one of them was intrepid enough to find this highway and show people what it is and where it is.
Yeah, let's take a quick look at your report now.
Friends, we found it. It was hard. They don't want you to see this. It's very difficult to find where we are on Google Maps. We actually had to find somewhere close and then Uber there. What's behind me is what's called Avienda Liberdad. Now, that means Freedom Highway, but it is the highway, the 13-kilometer highway that the government cut through the rainforest to alleviate the traffic, if you can believe that, for the United Nations Climate Change Conference. Now, this highway was first proposed in 2012, but it was put on the shelf back then because they said cutting a highway through the Amazon rainforest would be too environmentally precarious. But it's not environmentally precarious when the world's elites need a shortcut to their climate change conference. We would love to show you what this highway looks like from above as it carves its way through the Amazon rainforest, but we can't. And that's not because we don't have the equipment. We brought a drone with us, but because this project is so embarrassing to the government, they are not allowing drones to go up. In fact, last night in the city, we met a man who works security on this highway, and he said part of his job is shooting the drones down. So we could put our drone up, but we would never get the footage because we would never have the drone ever again. And I've got to be honest with you, I'm not against highways. I love highways. But cutting a highway through the rainforest, it could be problematic. But it's the least problematic thing I saw in the Amazon today, because right beside this highway construction site is, I think, what they might deem a resort, but the stench of garbage piled up here in the 32-degree heat was horrific. It's right in front of me. It's right along this little stream that flows into the Amazon behind me.
Well, Sheila, you mentioned a ton of journalists. I know that there was one other independent journalist who was there earlier. His name is Walid Tamtam. He works for our friends at Juno News. I was glad he went. Is there any other journalists there from Canada that you can detect? I mean, it's a big place, you might not see them all, but even their work on TV, and if so, here's the obvious question: are they there as stenographers, just repeaters, or has any of them asked even a single skeptical question?
I think we know the answer to that. The CBC, the mainstream media have journalists here. You did point out that Walid Tamtam was here. I did run into a journalist that I always run into at these things. It's Alex Newman, who works for the New American. I know that our friends from CFACT were here earlier. So again, American journalists. They were eager to talk to us. But as far as the Canadian journalists, they're just repeaters, and they're sitting in the comfort of the air conditioning in the UN complex while we're outside telling the real story of the city around us.
Last question for you. I remember when Donald Trump was first elected, and that put it was like a funereal mood over this place because, I remember Justin Trudeau was elected in 2015. The first thing he went to was the Paris Global Warming Summit. It was luxurious. It was Paris. Who wouldn't love to go to Paris? Canada had, I think, the largest delegation in the world. Everyone wanted a free trip to Paris. And it was the best of times. 1 year later, or maybe it was 2 years later, forgive me, I'd have to check the timing. It would have been January 2017. Or, sorry, you know what? Let me withdraw the exact date. It was right after Trump was elected. I forget the exact date. Mm-hmm. And it was, oh my God, Trump is in, the party's over. Now then, Trump was replaced by Joe Biden for 4 years, and they had John Kerry as the climate ambassador. Everything was revved up again. Are we back to the funeral procession where everyone down there knows that sure, they can do their deals and lobbying and get their contracts, but it's not going to be the glorious utopia that they once thought.
I was in Marrakesh right after Donald Trump got elected, and he said he was going to tear up the Paris Agreement. And that was sort of hanging in the air like a cloud when I was there. Now, I will tell you that this doesn't seem funerary, but I think they've learned something here at the United Nations Climate Change Conference. In fact, I think they're building on that post-Donald Trump getting elected the first time censorship, and they're incorporating that into what they're doing here now. They know that that's how they win the information battle, is by censoring people like me, skeptics of, the taxes change the weather mantra. And the Canadian government has signed on to basically a climate change misinformation decree. And where, skeptical journalists should be censored and pro-climate change journalists should be rewarded for their coverage. And that's what's coming out of this United Nations Climate Change Conference. So we're seeing them learning by censoring the internet. They're making sure that the information that we put out there, firsthand journalism, they're making sure that if they had their way, it wouldn't see the light of day.
Well, Brazil is a real battleground over censorship. I was there about a year ago with our colleague Efron Monsanto to cover a huge rally. I think there were 200,000 people there who were rallying for free speech after a judge banned Twitter, or now called X, from the entire country. Every single account was banned because Twitter was reporting things that this judge didn't like about politics. So Brazil really is a front line in the censorship information wars. And it's such a huge country population-wise that it is a great prize. Brazil is such a great prize, and it swings back. I mean, Bolsonaro was the president before. He was very America-centric, very freedom-oriented. And now Lula, I think, is back in. I forget names of these communists. So South America is huge. The whole continent is a battleground, and I'm not surprised that censorship is the weapon being used. Pardon me. I'm glad you were allowed in the country. They could have stopped you at the border.
Time.
Sorry, go ahead.
I bet it'll be the last. I was just saying, I bet it'll be the last time. We did get our Brazilian visas to work here. However, I've been hearing from Brazilians online reaching out to me after they've seen my work to say, look, the government does not look kindly on foreign journalists pointing out the problems with our country. And so while you're here, work really hard, but you probably won't be allowed back.
Wow. Well, I'm glad they let you in. I guess they didn't really know who you were. They hadn't done their due diligence. Why would they? But now that you've been reporting, really probably one of the only independent journalists at this thing. You know what? That's a shame, because Brazil is, in many ways, is such a wonderful place. I was only there for a couple of days, but it's got a lot of problems. And sunlight is usually part of a solution for any problem, not hiding things. Sheila, great to see you. I'm glad you're safe. You. Stay safe. It's a bit of a rougher place than back home here. Yes. Keep up the great work. Thanks for your help.